Hey guys, tonight you're not walking through shining castles or royal feasts. You're stepping straight into the filthiest streets of medieval Europe. The gutters overflow beside your boots, pigs wander through the alleys, smoke clings to the air, and somewhere in the dark, monastery bells echo above the mud and rain. Medieval life was cold, crowded, loud, and honestly, it smelled absolutely terrible. So if you enjoy immersive medieval stories that feel like drifting through another world beside a warm fire, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And before we begin, comment your location and local time below so we can see who's joining tonight's journey. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's wander into Europe's dirtiest medieval streets together. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself beneath the dripping shadow of a medieval town wall, standing ankle deep in mud that feels strangely determined to keep one of your boots forever. Cold river mist drifts through the crooked streets ahead, carrying the smells of wet straw, wood smoke, horse sweat, and something far less inspiring that no one in this century seems eager to discuss directly. Torchlight flickers against damp stone. Somewhere above, unseen bells ring through the evening haze from a monastery hidden behind rooftops and chimney smoke. You pull your cloak tighter as carts creak past the gatehouse, splashing filthy water onto already miserable travellers. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. A stable boy brushes by carrying a bucket whose contents you wisely choose not to investigate. Nearby, a tired guard leans on a spear with the expression of a man who has smelled this street for 20 straight years and lost the ability to complain about it around year 3. Honestly, you probably would not last a week out here without begging for a bath and crying over the condition of the bedding. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, feel free to comment your location and local time as we wander together through these muddy old streets. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The town gate groans open slowly beside you. Thick oak reinforced with bands of black iron polished smooth by centuries of rain and hands. 2 lanterns sway overhead in the wind, throwing uneven circles of light across puddles so dark they look bottomless. A line of travellers inches forward, merchants with wool bundles tied beneath tarps, a monk clutching a satchel of manuscripts under his cloak, and a woman balancing a basket of onions while muttering prayers every time a cartwheel splashes near her hem. You shuffle forward with them, boots sinking into the soft street. Beneath the mud lies a hidden mixture of straw, ash, animal dung, kitchen scraps, and whatever else the town has failed to remove this week. The streets of medieval Europe are not paved in most quarters, only pressed flat by generations of feet and hooves. During dry weather they become dusty trenches. During rain, like tonight, they become soup. A guard at the gate holds out one gloved hand for the market toll. His beard glistens with drizzle. He smells faintly of ale and damp wool. Business or shelter, he asks. Shelter, you answer, 'cause it feels safest. He grunts as though shelter is the least surprising answer possible. No one can quite agree whether these town guards are harsher in winter or merely smell worse. Some swear the cold makes them kinder. Others claim frozen mud simply slows their ability to chase thieves. You pass beneath the archway into the town itself, and the noise folds around you immediately. The street narrows between leaning timber houses whose upper floors nearly touch overhead. Rainwater drips steadily from roof edges. Candles flicker behind stretched parchment windows. Somewhere nearby, pigs squeal in complaint as a boy tries unsuccessfully to pull them from the road. The smell changes every few steps. Fresh bread from a baker's oven, wet leather from a cobbler's stall, smoke from green wood burning badly. Then suddenly the sour rot of refuse tossed into a side gutter hours earlier. Medieval streets possess layers of scent the way monasteries possess layers of prayer. You edge aside as a horse clatters past, its rider hunched beneath a fur-lined cloak. Mud splashes your leg. The rider does not apologize. Medieval customer service has not yet been invented. Above the rooftops rises the square tower of a church, its bells tolling the evening hour. Time here is not measured by clocks for most people, but by bells' dawn prayers, market openings, sunset devotions, curfews. Even travellers begin unconsciously arranging their lives around the sound. You notice rushes scattered across the floor of a butcher's open front stall as you pass. In wealthier homes and shops, dried rushes are spread across stone floors to soften footsteps and absorb dirt. The trouble is they are not always changed very often. Under fresh layers may hide months of old food scraps, grease, fleas, and things best left unidentified. A dog emerges from beneath a cart and begins following you. Its fur is damp and patchy, one ear bent permanently sideways. It keeps a careful distance, hopeful but suspicious. You suspect the animal survives mostly on dropped scraps and poor decisions. Ahead, the street opens briefly into a market square crowded with half-packed stalls. Merchants secure canvas covers against the rain while apprentices haul barrels towards storage sheds. A fishwife dumps cloudy water into the gutter, where it immediately joins the slow river already crawling downhill through the street centre. The gutters here are shallow trenches running between buildings and roadways. In theory, they carry waste away toward the river outside town walls. In practice, they mostly relocate the problem a few streets over. You pause beneath the overhang of a cooper's workshop while rain thickens overhead. Hammering echoes from within as craftsmen shape iron hoops around barrels by firelight. Their hands move automatically despite the late hour. A bent old man beside you spits into the gutter and mutters, "Too much rain means fever." You glance at him. He shrugs, or too little rain. Depends who you ask. That, you begin noticing, is the foundation of nearly all medieval medical knowledge. A group of children rushes through the square chasing one another with sticks. One wears a wooden charm tied around his neck shaped like a tiny hand. Some townsfolk believe such charms ward away sickness carried through foul air. Others hang herbs above doorways for the same reason. Rosemary, sage, juniper branches, sweet smells fighting losing battles against the city itself. The bells ring again, softer now through rain. You continue deeper into the streets, passing shuttered homes with smoke curling from roof vents into the darkening sky. Water drips steadily from laundry lines overhead. Somewhere nearby, someone sings while washing dishes in a wooden basin. The melody drifts strangely beautifully through all this filth. That is the thing no one tells you about these medieval streets. They are exhausting and foul and endlessly muddy. Yes, but they are alive in a way difficult to describe. Every narrow alley holds movement. Every window glows with hidden stories. Every doorway contains warmth, argument, laughter, prayer, or hunger. A woman carrying beeswax candles wrapped in cloth nearly collides with you and mutters an apology before vanishing into the crowd. Beeswax is expensive compared to rough tallow candles, which smell smoky and faintly animal when burned. Wealthier households prize the cleaner flame of beeswax the way future centuries will prize polished silver or imported tea. The dog still follows you. At the edge of the square, you finally spot an alehouse marked by a painted wooden sign swinging above the door, a faded red lion whose expression suggests deep disappointment in humanity. Warm orange light spills from inside. So does the smell of stew. And for the first time since entering the town, you feel your frozen hands begin to hope. The red lion on the alehouse sign creaks above you as wind pushes rain through the narrow street. Water drips from your cloak hem. The dog pauses beside the doorway, staring upward with the hopeful patience of a creature that has perfected the art of surviving near kitchens. Inside, warmth hits you first. Not clean warmth exactly. Medieval warmth rarely arrives without complications. This warmth carries smoke, spilled ale, damp wool, onion broth, wet leather, and the unmistakable scent of too many people drying themselves beside the same hearth. Still, after the freezing streets outside, it feels almost luxurious. You duck beneath the low lintel and step into the crowded room. Rushes crunch softly beneath your boots. Fresh ones have been scattered recently across the floor, pale gold beneath the candlelight, though darker patches beneath the table suggest older layers hiding underneath. Some household manuals claim herbs should be mixed into floor rushes to sweeten the air, lavender if one can afford it, mint when available, wormwood to repel pests. Judging by the smell near the back wall, tonight's herbs are losing courage. The hearth dominates the room, large enough for a man to stand inside. Iron pots hang over glowing coals while smoke crawls upward into soot-black rafters crowded with hanging onions, drying herbs, and strips of smoked fish. Not all the smoke escapes properly. A grey haze lingers near the ceiling, softening every voice and lantern flame into something sleepy and blurred. You settle onto a bench near the fire while an alewife sets down a rough clay cup without asking whether you want one. Apparently your face already answers that question. The ale tastes sour and slightly smoky, which means, by local standards, it is probably excellent. At the next table, merchants argue quietly over wool prices while a pilgrim dries muddy boots near the hearth. Tiny metal badges shaped like saints hang from his hat brim, clinking whenever he moves. Pilgrims collect such badges from shrines and holy sites across Europe. Some believe the tokens protect travellers from illness or robbery. Others wear them simply because medieval souvenirs are surprisingly competitive. No one can quite agree whether certain relics truly heal sickness or merely comfort frightened people enough to survive it. Some swear a saint's finger bone cured blindness in a nearby town. Others insist the miracle involved very convenient lighting. The alewife returns carrying a wooden bowl of pottage thick with barley, cabbage, and bits of onion floating near the surface like exhausted sailors. A heel of coarse bread lands beside it with enough force to suggest deep personal resentment toward bread. You thank her anyway. The bread is dense enough to stop a small siege weapon, but it is warm, and warmth matters more than elegance in places like this. Across the room, a pair of apprentices sit bent over a rushlight candle, whispering over dice. Rushlights are made by dipping dried plant stalks in grease. They burn dimly and smell faintly unpleasant, but they are cheap, which in medieval towns usually settles the matter. The dog eventually slips inside unnoticed and curls beneath your bench. A fiddler near the hearth begins playing softly, not a lively tune for dancing, but something slow and repetitive that drifts comfortably beneath the murmur of conversation. Rain taps steadily against the shutters. Tankards knock against tables. Someone laughs too loudly near the back room and is immediately shushed by 3 different strangers. You eat slowly while studying the walls around you. Wooden pegs hold cloaks steaming gently dry. Bundles of garlic hang near the kitchen archway to ward off sickness and evil spirits with equal determination. A cracked horseshoe above the door supposedly keeps bad luck outside. Though considering the smell lingering near the privy corner, bad luck clearly found another entrance. A broad-shouldered cooper lowers himself onto the bench beside you with a tired groan. His hands are stained dark from oak pitch. "Road's bad," he asks. "Worse near the river." "They always are." He drinks deeply. Town council keeps promising new drainage channels. He pauses. "Been promising since my grandfather's time." Outside, wagon wheels grind through mud beyond the shutters. The cooper jerks his thumb toward the noise. "Street's cleaner in winter at least." You glance toward the gutter visible through the doorway. It does not look cleaner. "Frozen," he explained, "harder to sink." "Fair enough." A serving girl moves between tables carrying trenchers stacked with roasted turnips and smoked eel. Trenchers are thick slices of stale bread used as plates in many households. After meals, the soaked bread may be eaten, fed to animals, or given to the poor depending on how desperate everyone feels. At the hearth, the pilgrim begins telling stories from the road. You catch fragments between the noise. A shrine where candles supposedly relight themselves at midnight. A monastery where monks brew ale strong enough to make sinners confess voluntarily. A bridge haunted by a woman in grey who warns travellers before floods. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the woman is a ghost, a saint, or simply someone's aunt who enjoys dramatic entrances. The fiddler shifts tunes again, slower now, sleepier. You feel the day's damp cold beginning to leave your hands at last. Near the kitchen, two women scatter fresh straw across a muddy patch where customers tracked in rainwater. Medieval inns fight dirt constantly, though usually with the resigned attitude of soldiers losing a familiar war. The cooper beside you leans closer. "You staying inside the walls long? Just tonight, perhaps?" He grunts thoughtfully. "Avoid Tanner's Lane tomorrow, unless you enjoy smells powerful enough to rearrange memory." You nod solemnly as though this is useful survival wisdom rather than terrifying poetry. Another bell rings outside, deeper this time. Curfew approaches. Town gates will soon close until morning. Late travellers caught outside must sleep beneath carts, bribe gatekeepers, or trust roadside shelters filled with fleas ambitious enough to deserve military titles. The alehouse grows quieter as the hour deepens. Some customers leave carrying lanterns through the rain. Others pull cloaks tighter and settle closer to the fire. The dog beneath your bench sighs heavily in its sleep, twitching one paw as if chasing imaginary rabbits through better centuries. You notice an old woman near the hearth dropping crumbs carefully into the flames. A superstition. Some believe feeding the fire keeps household spirits calm during storms. Others say it honours wandering souls who cannot enter warm homes. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these customs survive from faith, fear, or simple habit repeated so long no one questions it anymore. The cooper eventually rises with another groan and pulls on his cloak. "Sleep light," he mutters. "Night carts start before dawn." You almost ask what night carts are, but exhaustion wins. The alewife finally gestures toward a narrow staircase along the wall. "Loft space still open," she says. "Mind the roof leak." Of course there is a roof leak. You climb carefully upstairs beneath beams blackened by decades of smoke. The loft holds little more than straw pallets lined shoulder to shoulder beneath the slanted roof. Travellers already sleep beneath wool blankets, boots tucked protectively against their chests. Rain patters softly overhead. A candle flickers near the far wall beside a cracked wooden-sent figure whose painted eyes have nearly faded away. Someone has tucked dried flowers beside it. You settle onto an empty pallet while cold wind slips faintly through the roof boards. Below, muffled conversation continues beside the hearth. The smell of smoke rises gently upward through the floor. Outside, somewhere beyond the shutters, monastery bells mark another passing hour over the filthy sleeping streets. And below the window, the town gutter keeps flowing slowly downhill through darkness toward the river, Sleep comes lightly in the loft above the alehouse. Not because the pallet is uncomfortable, though it certainly feels as if someone stuffed the mattress with old rope, damp straw, and medieval disappointment. The real problem is the noise. Medieval towns never fully sleep. Somewhere below, tankards still knock together beside the dying hearth. Rain taps against warped roof boards overhead. A man across the loft snores with the determination of a siege trumpet. And every so often, from far beyond the shuttered window, comes the distant rumble of wheels moving through mud. Night carts. You eventually drift into shallow sleep anyway, wrapped in your cloak while cold air slips through gaps in the roof. Dreams arrive smelling faintly of smoke and wet wool. Then bells wake you. At first you think dawn has come, but the room remains dark except for one dying candle beside the little wooden saint. The bells belong to a monastery somewhere across town, marking the night office long before sunrise. Monks rise repeatedly for prayer through the darkness. Merchants complain about it. Travellers curse it. Dogs howl along occasionally as though participating. The dog from downstairs now sleeps curled near your pallet. Apparently you've acquired him. You lie still for a moment, listening to rainwater dripping steadily into a bucket somewhere below. Wind sighs through the eaves. A traveller mutters prayers in his sleep nearby. Then another sound reaches you. Voices outside, low, tired, accompanied by the scrape of wheels. Curiosity overcomes common sense, which is historically one of humanity's less successful traditions. You rise quietly, wrap your cloak tighter, and move toward the shutter. Outside, the street glistens black beneath lantern light. 3 men push a heavy cart slowly uphill through the mud. Barrels slosh in the back beneath rough cloth covers. The smell reaches even the upper window before understanding does. Night soil collectors. The less celebrated sanitation workers of medieval Europe. During the night, when streets empty and darkness hides most indignities, these labourers haul away waste from cesspits and privies before the city wakes. Some towns regulate the trade carefully. Others simply hope the carts do not overturn. Judging by the expressions of the men below, this particular town belongs firmly to the second category. One collector pauses beneath your window and wipes rain from his beard. "You spill it again. I leave you in it," he warns another worker. A reasonable workplace policy. The cart continues slowly downhill while lanterns sway over puddles. Behind them trails the sour smell of the sleeping city itself. No one can quite agree whether medieval streets were truly as filthy as later generations claimed. Some chroniclers exaggerated to mock rival towns. Others probably understated conditions because they still had to eat breakfast there. You close the shutter firmly. Morning eventually creeps into the loft grey and cold. Rain has weakened to mist. Pale light slips through cracks in the boards, while travellers begin rising one by one with soft groans and the rustle of blankets. Below, the alehouse awakens in stages. Fire pokers scrape against hearthstones. Pots clang. Someone curses mildly over spilled ale. The smell of onions frying in fat drifts upward through the floorboards, followed closely by fresh bread. Not fine white bread reserved for nobles, but dark rye loaves dense enough to survive minor floods. You descend the stairs carefully. The common room looks softer in morning light. Smoke curls lazily toward the rafters. Fresh rushes have already been spread over yesterday's muddy footprints. The alewife moves between tables carrying bowls of oat pottage, while apprentices rub sleep from their eyes beside the fire. Outside the doorway, the street has transformed. Yesterday evening's muddy chaos now pulses with early trade. Merchants hammer open stall shutters. Bakers arrange loaves beneath striped awnings. Fishwives unload barrels packed with river ice and wet straw. The gutters still run thick with grime, but now sunlight glints faintly across the water, almost making it look respectable. Almost. You step outside with a warm loaf tucked beneath one arm and the dog immediately falls into step beside you again. He seems deeply committed to this arrangement. The morning air smells cleaner after rain, though only by medieval standards. Smoke rises from dozens of chimneys into pale mist. Church bells continue marking the hours overhead, while townsfolk hurry through narrow streets balancing baskets, barrels, and impossible optimism. A woman sweeps refuse from her doorway directly into the gutter. Efficiency matters here. Children chase chickens through puddles near a butcher's stall. One boy slips and lands flat in the mud while his friends laugh so hard they nearly join him. Nobody seems particularly alarmed. Medieval childhood involves a great deal of dirt and very little hovering supervision. You wander slowly toward the market square again. Now fully awake, it feels larger than before. Canvas stalls stretch in uneven rows across the open ground while traders shout prices over one another beneath drifting smoke from cook fires. Mud clings to hems and boots everywhere. Oxen snort clouds of steam into the morning cold. A tax collector stands beneath the town hall archway beside iron scales used for market tolls. Every cart entering town pays fees depending on goods carried: grain, wool, wine, timber, fish. Complaints about taxes sound remarkably similar in every century. Near the well at the square centre, women fill wooden buckets while gossip flows faster than the water itself. You pause near a baker arranging small honey cakes dusted lightly with crushed nuts. Fresh this morning, he promises. The cakes look excellent. A bee currently walking across one suggests local quality control remains relaxed. Still, you buy one. It tastes surprisingly good. Nearby, an old woman sells tiny cloth charms stitched with herbs and scraps of parchment prayers. She waves one toward you. For protection from foul air. What's in it, you ask? Juniper, sage, blessed ash. She lowers her voice. And a bit of hedgehog. You decide not to ask further questions. Some swear sickness spreads through corrupted air rising from rot and stagnant water. Others blame bad planetary alignments, sinful behaviour, angry saints, or invisible poisons carried by foreigners. Medieval medicine rarely lacks confidence, only agreement. The dog receives half your honey cake and becomes even more loyal. At the edge of the market you notice two workers scraping mud from stone steps outside a merchant house. One throws fresh rushes across the cleaned entrance, while the other sprinkles herbs from a basket. Mint today, asks a passing woman. Mint's expensive, the worker replies, mostly nettles. Close enough, apparently. You continue through the square while sunlight gradually burns through the mist above the rooftops. Church towers emerge clearer now beyond crooked timber houses. Laundry flaps overhead between windows. Somewhere a blacksmith begins hammering iron rhythmically enough to sound almost musical. And beneath it all runs the constant hidden life of the streets themselves. Water draining slowly downhill. Pigs rooting beneath carts. Servants emptying basins into gutters. Smoke gathering under roof lines. Dogs wandering hopefully from stall to stall. A city alive before breakfast. At the far side of the square, a narrow lane descends between crowded buildings toward darker districts nearer the river. The smell drifting upward from there is unmistakable even at this distance. Sharp. Rotting. Chemical. You remember the cooper's warning from last night. Tanner's Lane. The dog stops walking and looks up at you uncertainly, as if even he has limits. The dog refuses Tanner's Lane entirely. He plants himself at the corner of the market square with the quiet dignity of a creature who has survived long enough to recognize terrible decisions before making them. You stand for a moment at the mouth of the descending lane while foul-smelling mist drifts upward between crowded buildings. The dog sneezes once, then sits down firmly. Fair enough. You leave him beside a baker's stall where crumbs seem plentiful and continue alone into the narrowing street. The ground slopes sharply toward the river, and with every step the smell thickens until it settles into your cloak and hair like an unwanted blessing. Tanneries always stand near water. The work requires endless soaking, scraping, rinsing, and curing of hides. Medieval towns place them near rivers both for convenience and because nobody with authority wishes to smell them from inside richer districts. Tanner's Lane feels less like part of the town and more like a punishment attached to it. Smoke drifts low over the roofs. Wooden vats line the street edges beneath crude awnings. Hides hang from poles like heavy wet curtains, dripping brown water into gutters already clogged with scraps of fur and lime. You immediately regret breathing through your nose. A tanner glances up from scraping a cowhide stretched across a beam. His apron looks permanently stained by every unpleasant liquid known to humanity. "Morning," he says casually. You nod while attempting not to faint. The man resumes scraping with a curved knife, removing fat and hair in long wet strips. The sound is strangely steady, almost peaceful, if one ignores the smell powerful enough to challenge memory itself. No one can quite agree which medieval profession smells worst. Tanners blame fishmongers, fishmongers blame dyers, everyone blames tanners eventually. Further downhill, workers stir huge vats with wooden poles. Some contain oak bark mixtures used for curing leather. Others contain urine collected from across the city because ammonia helps loosen hair from hides. Yes, entire trades depend upon barrels of stored urine. Children in poorer districts sometimes earn coins by gathering it from chamber pots for workshops. Medieval recycling possesses a level of commitment modern cities rarely achieve. You step carefully around puddles whose contents you prefer not to identify individually. Overhead, laundry hangs between buildings despite the smell. Life continues here because people cannot simply stop existing whenever conditions become unpleasant. A woman carrying bundles of leather straps passes you with a cloth wrapped tightly over her mouth. "River floods again," she mutters to no one specifically. "Whole quarter smells like boiled demons." An understandable description. Below the lane, the river itself crawls grey beneath the town wall. Waste from workshops drains directly toward it through narrow channels cut into stone. Some towns attempt regulations about dumping refuse. Others trust prayer and downstream villages. You reach a small open yard crowded with vats and drying racks. Hear the sounds of the district surround you, fully scraping knives, dripping water, hammer blows, crows arguing over scraps. One young apprentice kneels beside a tub rubbing oil into finished leather gloves. His hands move carefully despite the cold. "Good leather lasts longer than men," says an older worker nearby. "Especially customers," another replies. The workers laugh softly. Even here, buried beneath fumes strong enough to frighten saints, humour survives. A little farther on, you notice bunches of herbs hanging beside several doorways. Juniper branches, rosemary, dried lavender where families can afford it, not merely for pleasant scent but protection. Some swear sweet herbs purify corrupted air. Others believe certain plants discourage evil spirits drawn to sickness and decay. Even now, it's hard to tell whether these customs offer real comfort or simply the feeling of fighting back against conditions impossible to control. At the lane's lower end stands a tiny shrine wedged awkwardly between two workshops. Its wooden saint figure has darkened from smoke and rain over the years. Beeswax candles flicker beneath a crooked roof, while scraps of ribbon tied along the railing flutter in the river wind. A tanner pauses beside the shrine before returning to work, touching 2 fingers briefly against the saint's foot. You study the worn carving. Patron saint of leatherworkers perhaps, or protection from disease, or floods. Medieval saints become responsible for an exhausting number of emergencies. Some swear the river once rose so high it carried dead pigs straight through this district and into the market square above. Others insist that tail grows larger every winter after enough ale. You would not entirely rule it out. Turning back uphill, you notice how narrow the street truly is. Upper floors lean overhead until the pale morning sky becomes only a strip between roof lines. Water drips constantly from beams and gutters. Rats dart along walls, vanishing beneath stacked barrels. People live here despite everything. Children play here. Families eat supper here while smoke curls beneath rafters blackened by decades of cooking fires. One doorway stands open just enough for you to glimpse the inside of a home, rushes spread across packed earth flooring, a wool blanket hanging for privacy, onions dangling from a beam, and a woman kneading dough beside the hearth while a baby sleeps in a basket near the fire. The ordinary softness of it catches you unexpectedly, because medieval towns are never only filth. They are also bread rising near warm ovens, candlelight on damp walls, boots drying beside hearths, quiet songs after long labour, people endlessly trying to carve comfort from difficult places. You climb back toward the market square slowly. Halfway uphill, rain begins again, not heavy, just a fine drifting mist that darkens cloaks and turns packed earth slick beneath your boots. Workers groan softly and cover stacked hides with canvas sheets. One apprentice slips entirely into a muddy gutter. His companions applaud. The boy stands dripping and furious while everyone nearby laughs, including eventually the boy himself. Survival in medieval streets requires either resilience or an astonishing commitment to complaining. Possibly both. Back near the market square, the familiar dog reappears instantly from beneath a cart as though summoned by your return. He sniffs your cloak cautiously, then sneezes again. Yes, you tell him. You were right. The square has grown busier while you wandered. Merchants crowd beneath awnings as rain thickens overhead. A bell rings somewhere beyond the church towers while servants hurry carrying baskets beneath cloaks. Near the well, 2 women argue over whose household dumped spoiled cabbage into the shared gutter. The argument appears old enough to qualify as local tradition. Meanwhile, a pair of town watchmen push through the crowd carrying lantern poles even though daylight still lingers grey overhead. Curfew announcements tonight, perhaps, or warnings about flooded streets, or another wagon stuck in mud deep enough to require divine intervention. In medieval towns, all 3 possibilities feel equally likely. You pull your cloak tighter against the rain while the dog trots beside your boots. Together you move toward the shelter of the crowded square as bells echo softly through damp, smoky air above Europe's dirtiest streets. Rain settles over the town like a grey wool blanket. Not dramatic rain, nothing violent or theatrical, just the steady kind that medieval streets seem designed to suffer beneath for entire centuries. Water slides from roof edges in crooked streams. Gutters swell slowly along the lane sides. Mud deepens under cartwheels until every passing wagon sounds exhausted. You and the dog shelter beneath the overhang of a cloth merchant's stall near the market square, while traders scramble to protect goods with waxed canvas sheets. The square smells of wet straw, onions, sheep wool, and chimney smoke pressed low by damp air. A fishwife nearby shouts at the sky as if weather might reconsider out of embarrassment. It does not. Morning trade continues anyway because medieval towns do not pause politely for discomfort. Bread still needs baking. Leather still needs curing. Taxes still need collecting with remarkable enthusiasm. Across the square, apprentices spread fresh straw over the mud near heavily travelled walkways. It helps slightly for perhaps 3 minutes before dissolving into the street itself. A child immediately falls into it chasing a goose. The goose wins. You wander carefully toward the covered arcade beneath the Guildhall where merchants huddle beside their goods. The stone beneath your boots feels slick from generations of rain-polished footsteps. Above, carved wooden saints stare down from beams darkened by smoke and age. A spice trader arranges tiny cloth bundles across his table. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, ginger. Luxuries carried enormous distances across dangerous roads and seas, simply so wealthy people can feel more interesting during supper. The scent drifting from his stall cuts beautifully through the wet city smell. "Expensive day for rain," he mutters while covering the spices again. You nod as though you understand medieval import economics. In truth, you're mostly thinking about warm soup. The dog curls beside your boots while bells ring somewhere beyond the rooftops. Monastery bells again, patient and regular through the mist. Time passes here through sound more than sight. The sky remains the same dull grey hour after hour, but bells divide the day into manageable pieces. Near the Guildhall entrance, a group of labourers struggles with a wagon wheel trapped deep in the mud. 4 men push while another whips the oxen gently forward. Nothing moves. One labourer finally removes his cap and says something toward heaven. That is probably not technically prayer. The wheel sinks deeper. 2 passing monks pretend not to hear him. No one can quite agree whether muddy streets improve community spirit or destroy it entirely. Some claim neighbours become kinder while helping each other through disasters. Others point toward wagon wheels and quietly drink more ale. You continue along the arcade where narrow stalls crowd shoulder to shoulder beneath dripping awnings. A parchment seller tries desperately to keep his goods dry beneath the layers of cloth. Beside him, an old woman sells beeswax candles carefully wrapped in oiled linen. Better than tallow, she promises. Everything is better than tallow candles except darkness. Tallow smoke clings to walls and clothing with stubborn determination. Wealthier homes prefer beeswax not only for cleaner light but because it smells faintly sweet when burned. Monasteries especially prize it during long night prayers. The old woman notices the dog beside you. Stray. Possibly. He's chosen you then. Apparently medieval dogs operate under very clear legal systems. She tosses him a scrap of dried eel. Betrayal arrives quickly. Further down the arcade, a barber surgeon's striped pole hangs above a cramped doorway. Through the open shutters you glimpse jars of herbs, folded cloth bandages, and metal tools gleaming dimly beside the hearth. A patient emerges holding one side of his face while muttering unhappily. The barber surgeon follows him to the door. "No cold ale today," the healer warns, "and avoid onions." The patient looks devastated. Medical science continues its long, difficult journey. You pause beside a public notice board attached to the Guildhall wall. Wax seals hang beneath rain-spotted announcements regarding market tolls, missing livestock, and one warning against dumping refuse too near the church well. That last instruction appears deeply optimistic considering the gutter directly beneath the sign. A pair of women hurry past carrying covered baskets between them. Steam escapes briefly from beneath the cloth. Fresh pies. The smell nearly changes your religion. The dog notices too and follows with dangerous interest until one woman shoos him away using language probably forbidden inside monasteries. Rain thickens briefly overhead, drumming against the awnings hard enough to silence conversation across part of the square. People draw closer beneath shelter. Cloaks drip steadily onto rush-covered floors inside nearby shops. For a little while, the entire town seems to pause and listen. Rain on canvas, rain on stone, rain sliding through gutters toward the river. Somewhere beyond the square, you hear the rhythmic clanging of a blacksmith continuing despite the weather. Ironwork rarely waits for comfort. Neither do bakers, washerwomen, scribes, coopers, or stable boys. Life in these streets depends upon constant motion. Even misery has schedules. At the edge of the arcade, a young scribe sits near a narrow window, scratching carefully across parchment while daylight still permits it. His fingers are stained black with ink. Tiny knives, quills, and pumice stones lie arranged beside him with almost sacred neatness. You stop briefly to watch. Each letter forms slowly beneath his hand. Beautiful, precise, and probably expensive enough to equal several months of bread. Some swear scribes occasionally hide curses inside copied manuscripts against thieves or careless readers. Others insist exhausted monks simply doodle strange creatures in margins after too many sleepless nights. Honestly, both explanations seem possible. The rain finally softens toward afternoon, leaving the market square shining beneath weak pale light. Smoke rises again from chimneys now that cook fires strengthen indoors. The smell of roasting onions and barley stew drifts through open shutters. Your stomach reminds you it exists. You and the dog cross carefully through the muddy square toward a small cookshop tucked beside the church wall. Inside, benches crowd around narrow tables while travellers warm stiff hands beside a charcoal brazier. A widow serves you thick pea pottage in a wooden bowl along with coarse bread still warm from the oven. Simple food. Heavy food. Exactly the sort of meal built for cold, wet towns where people burn strength merely walking uphill through mud. As you eat, the church bells above suddenly ring louder than before. Not prayer this time. Warning bells! Several heads lift immediately inside the cookshop. Outside, voices rise across the square while people hurry toward the street leading downhill to the river. The widow sighs heavily. Floodwater again, she mutters. And somewhere beyond the dripping rooftops of the town, you hear men already shouting over the rush of rising water through Europe's dirtiest streets. The warning bells continue ringing as you step back into the square with the wooden bowl's warmth still lingering in your hands. Around you, townsfolk move with the weary speed of people who have handled the same problem many times before. Floodwater, nobody panics exactly. Medieval towns reserve true panic for fires, plague rumours, and tax collectors with written authority. Flooding belongs to a lower, more familiar category of suffering. Still unpleasant, though. Rainwater rushes downhill through the streets now, carrying straw, ash, vegetable scraps, and things you carefully refuse to identify. The gutters overflow first, then the lane edges, then suddenly the entire street becomes one broad muddy current sliding toward the river district. The dog presses close against your boots as another church bell joins the warning chorus. Near the market well, merchants scramble to lift crates and sacks onto higher platforms. Apprentices drag barrels indoors. A baker shouts at two boys attempting to float cabbage leaves down the flooded gutter like tiny boats. The boys continue doing it anyway. At the square's edge, townsfolk crowd beneath awnings to watch water surge along the lower streets. Voices overlap through the rain. River crossed the Tannery Bridge already. Heard 3 carts stuck near Miller's Alley. Serves them right charging those tolls. Even now, during minor civic disaster, medieval people somehow maintain energy for personal grudges. You follow the gathering crowd carefully downhill toward the river quarter. Mud sucks at your boots. Rain drips steadily from rooflines overhead. Torches flicker dimly beneath the grey afternoon. The lower lanes already resemble canals. Water rushes around wagon wheels and beneath raised doorsteps, while residents pile sand, straw, and wooden boards against entrances in hopeful little barriers. A woman in rolled skirts sweeps water away from her bakery doorway with such determination you almost believe she might defeat the river personally. Almost. Further ahead, the narrow bridge near Tanner's Lane has become a shouting match. Two carts meet in the middle while floodwater churns beneath them. One carries wool bundles wrapped beneath canvas. The other transports barrels leaking weak ale into the rain. Neither driver wishes to reverse. Naturally. A crowd gathers instantly because medieval entertainment options remain limited and public arguments are free. You move, shouts one driver. "You're uphill," the other answers. Your ox looks dishonest. An interesting accusation. Meanwhile, the ox continues standing there with the patient sadness common to creatures forced into human logistics. No one can quite agree why medieval streets narrow so dramatically around bridges and markets. Some blame old property lines. Others claim towns simply grew faster than planning allowed. A few probably suspect builders enjoyed watching future generations suffer. At last several watchmen arrive carrying long staffs and expressions of deep exhaustion. Their cloaks glisten with rain. "Back the ale cart," one orders. The driver protests immediately. Back it or swim home. The argument ends there. You move aside as wheels grind backward through muddy water inch by miserable inch. Around you, townsfolk mutter observations with the relaxed expertise of people discussing weather they have memorized since childhood. A fishmonger beside you spits into the flood. River always takes revenge in autumn. For what you ask. Existing near it mostly. Fair enough again. Beyond the bridge, Tanner's Lane looks even worse than before. Brown floodwater swirls around vats and work tables while apprentices desperately secure hanging hides above rising currents. The smell drifting upward grows powerful enough to seem visible. One worker wades knee-deep through water carrying bundles of leather overhead. Another simply stands in a doorway staring at the sky with the defeated expression of a man whose entire profession has dissolved into soup. The dog refuses to go farther downhill. Wise creature. You retreat with the crowd toward higher streets where rain finally begins weakening into mist again. Bells slow gradually, then stop altogether. Only the sounds of rushing water remain beneath distant hammering from workshops reopening cautiously. Near the church square, townsfolk already resume ordinary routines despite soaked hems and flooded gutters. A woman buys onions. A monk argues over candle prices. Children splash through puddles enthusiastically because childhood appears universally immune to common sense. You shelter beneath a stone archway while a group of servants carries buckets from a public well. One notices the dog. He follows you everywhere. Apparently. That means good fortune. Another servant snorts softly, or he thinks you smell like stew. Medieval wisdom often allows multiple interpretations. The servants disappear uphill, laughing quietly beneath dripping cloaks. Beside the archway hangs a tiny painted image of St. Christopher carrying a child across a river. Travellers touch the frame for protection while passing beneath. Rain has worn the paint nearly away over the years, yet fresh flowers still sit beneath it in a clay cup. Some swear roadside saints truly guard travellers from floods, thieves, and illness. Others quietly note that shrines appear most often exactly where accidents happen regularly. The mist thins further toward evening. Weak sunlight finally pushes through clouds in pale streaks above the rooftops, turning puddles silver across the square. Steam rises gently from wet cloaks and horsebacks. Bells resume their calmer evening rhythm from the monastery beyond town walls. You and the dog wander slowly back toward the alehouse district. Street sweepers already scrape mud from busy walkways into piles destined, somehow optimistically, for removal later. Fresh rushes appear across tavern floors again. Smoke curls from chimneys carrying the smell of supper into cooling air. A pie seller passes balancing trays covered in cloth. Roasted onions. Leeks. A little salt pork. The scent alone nearly heals emotional damage. At the alehouse entrance, the familiar cooper from yesterday stands smoking beside the doorway while watching muddy water crawl past the gutter. "Told you winter streets freeze eventually," he says. "Better system, honestly." "You call this a system?" He considers thoughtfully. "No. Reasonable. Inside." The common room glows warmer than before against the damp evening outside. Firelight dances across blackened beams while travellers crowd close beside the hearth, drying boots and cloaks. The alewife notices you enter and points immediately toward a bench. "Roof leaks worse tonight," she warns. You almost admire the consistency. The dog curls beside the fire without invitation. Clearly promoted now from stray visitor to unofficial staff member, nobody objects. A fiddler tunes strings softly near the hearth, while stew simmers over glowing coals. Rainwater drips steadily from cloaks hung near the wall. Someone nearby begins telling exaggerated flood stories already growing larger by the hour. According to one merchant, a pig floated directly through the market square carrying 3 chickens and half a cabbage. Those who tell the tale never fully agree about the cabbage. You settle onto the bench, warming cold hands around another clay cup of sour ale, while smoke curls lazily toward the rafters overhead. Outside, the gutters continue carrying the town slowly downhill toward the river. Inside, supper waits. And somewhere above the crowded streets, monastery bells welcome evening across the damp sleeping roofs of medieval Europe. By evening, the rain finally loosens its grip on the town. Clouds drift apart slowly above the rooftops, revealing thin bands of fading gold where sunset reaches across the river valley beyond the walls. Water still drips from every beam and shutter, but the streets themselves begin settling into quieter rhythms. Floodwater retreats inch by inch toward the river, leaving behind slick mud, abandoned straw, and the familiar smell of wet earth mixed with humanity's less poetic contributions. Inside the alehouse, supper thickens the air. Steam rises from bowls of onion pottage and smoked fish stew. Firelight flickers against damp cloaks hanging from pegs. Someone roasts chestnuts directly in the hearth, while travellers crowd shoulder to shoulder along the benches. You sit near the fire with the dog asleep beside your boots, his paws twitching faintly as though still chasing invisible geese through dream streets. The cooper from yesterday occupies the next bench again, because apparently medieval towns contain only 3 professions and everyone eventually returns to the same tavern. Across from him sits a barber surgeon with narrow fingers stained green from crushed herbs. A leather satchel rests beside his feet, smelling faintly of rosemary and vinegar. "Floods bring fever," the barber surgeon says while tearing bread apart carefully. "Always do." The cooper grunts. "Everything brings fever according to your lot. Because everything here leaks." An unfortunate but persuasive argument. The barber surgeon notices your attention and gestures toward his satchel. "Marsh herbs," he explained, "good against corrupted air." Inside the bag you glimpse bunches of sage, dried mint, garlic bulbs, and little cloth bundles tied with a red thread. Folk medicine and practical medicine live side by side in medieval towns, sharing shelves comfortably despite disagreeing about nearly everything. Some swear garlic wards off plague entirely. Others claim carrying dried flowers inside the cloak protects the lungs from poisoned fog rising off gutters and marshes. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the remedies work at all, or merely give frightened people something comforting to hold. The fiddler begins playing again near the hearth. Tonight the tune feels slower than before, softer, the sort of melody built for tired workers warming cold hands after difficult weather. Conversation lowers naturally beneath it while smoke drifts lazily through the rafters. You eat thick barley stew from a wooden bowl while listening to the room settle around evening. A merchant counts coins carefully beside the wall. 2 pilgrims whisper prayers over shared bread. An apprentice sleeps upright against a barrel while his master pretends not to notice. Near the door, a woman hangs tiny bundles of herbs along the entry beam. For luck you ask as she passes. For fleas. Practicality wins occasionally. Outside, bells ring from the monastery again, marking the final prayers before night deepens fully across the town. Through the shutter cracks you glimpse lanterns beginning to appear along the streets below. Their reflections ripple softly through puddles left by the flood. The barber surgeon leans closer to the hearth. Bad cough spreading near Miller's Alley, he mutters, started after last month's rains. The cooper shrugs. People always cough. Yes, but now they cough on me. Fair concern. The surgeon unwraps a tiny packet from his satchel and tosses dried rosemary into the fire. Sweet, sharp smoke rises instantly above the ordinary smell of stew and wet wool. A few nearby travellers nod approvingly. One woman quietly makes the sign of the cross. No one can quite agree where medicine ends and ritual begins in places like this. Burning herbs might cleanse air, or calm nerves, or simply overpower the smell of 50 damp people sharing one room. Honestly, all 3 outcomes seem valuable. A serving girl arrives carrying trenchers piled with roasted onions glazed in honey. The scent alone quiets half the room for a moment. Beside you. The dog opens one eye hopefully. You already had eel. You remind him. He remains unconvinced. Near the hearth, an old pilgrim begins telling stories again, his voice rough as worn leather. He speaks of a roadside shrine north of the mountains where travellers leave tiny iron keys beside the altar. Some swear the keys unlock illness from the body. Others claim they free souls trapped by bad fortune. Did you see a miracle there? Asks one apprentice sleepily. The pilgrim scratches his beard. I saw a goat survive falling off a roof. Silence follows briefly. That counts, says the cooper finally. The room nods in agreement. Medieval standards for miracles remain refreshingly flexible. Outside, darkness settles properly now. Through the shutters you hear watchmen moving along the lanes calling the hour. Their lanterns bob slowly through the mist while iron-tipped staffs knock against stone. Keep your fires watched. Curfew bells soon. Somewhere farther away another voice answers faintly through the streets. A baby cries. A horse snorts. A door slams against damp wind. The town slowly folds inward for the night. The alewife begins lighting additional candles around the room as shadows deepen beneath the rafters. Beeswax near the counter for paying guests. Cheap tallow nearer the kitchen where smoke already dominates the air enough to hide the smell. You notice the little wooden saint upstairs has been brought down beside the hearth tonight. Perhaps because of the flood. Fresh flowers rest at its base now along with a tiny clay bowl holding a single copper coin. Protection offerings. Or gratitude. Or insurance, spiritually speaking. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether saints prefer devotion, candles, flowers, or simply fewer requests during storms. The fiddler changes melodies again. Softer now. Almost hypnotic. You feel warmth settling heavily into your limbs, while outside the town grows quieter beneath misty dark. Water still trickles through gutters beyond the walls, but the angry rush from earlier has softened into steady dripping. The Cooper eventually rises and pulls his cloak around broad shoulders. "Road's worse tomorrow," he predicts cheerfully. "You always this hopeful—" "No," he says, "usually less." He disappears into the night. One by one, travellers drift upstairs toward the sleeping loft while the fire burns lower beside the hearth. The barber surgeon carefully repacks his herbs and mutters a prayer beneath his breath before leaving. You remain a little longer listening to the room breathe. Logs settling in the fire. Quiet conversation near the kitchen. Rainwater dripping from cloaks onto fresh rushes. The dog snoring softly beside your boots. Then finally you climb the narrow stairs again beneath smoke-dark beams toward the loft overhead. Tonight the roof leak taps steadily into 2 buckets instead of 1. Progress, perhaps. You settle onto the straw pallet while wind sighs gently outside the walls. Far away across the rooftops, monastery bells mark another passing hour over Europe's filthy sleeping streets. And beneath that sound, softer now than before, the town continues dreaming in mud, smoke, candlelight, and rain. Morning arrives pale and cold after the long wet night. You wake before sunrise to the sound of dripping water and distant bells rolling through the fog beyond the rooftops. The loft smells of damp straw, smoke trapped in wool blankets, and the faint sourness of too many travellers breathing the same air until dawn. Somewhere below, the alewife already stirs the hearth back to life. Wood crackles softly. A pot lid rattles. The dog lifts his head from beside your pallet, stretches with great seriousness, then immediately curls back into the warm hollow he created in the straw. A sensible philosophy. You pull your cloak tight and descend the narrow stairs while sleepy travellers mutter prayers, complaints, and weather predictions behind you. Downstairs, the common room glows dimly in the half-light before dawn. Only a few candles burn beside the hearth. Fresh rushes cover the floor again, though muddy footprints already threaten their future. The alewife places a bowl of oat porridge before you without needing to ask. "You'll want something warm," she says. Pilgrims started crowding the shrine road before sunrise. You glance up. What shrine? The riverside chapel beyond St. Aldwyn's gate. She snorts softly while wiping a cup with a cloth. Supposed miracle there this week. Of course there is. No medieval town survives long without at least one miracle rumour circulating through it like smoke. Outside, mist hangs low between the houses while dawn slowly brightens the sky above the walls. The streets remain quieter than usual after yesterday's flooding. Mud glistens beneath wagon ruts. Thin smoke rises from chimneys into the pale grey air. You and the dog head east through narrowing lanes toward St. Aldwyn's gate. Already the town begins waking around you. A cooper rolls barrels across wet stones. Women empty chamber pots carefully into gutters with the concentration of trained archers. A baker sweeps soaked straw from his doorway while singing under his breath. Near the church square, a line forms beside the public oven where poorer families pay to bake their bread using shared heat. The smell drifting from the stone vents almost makes you forget the gutter nearby carrying cabbage leaves and ash downhill toward the river. Almost. Bells ring again overhead, softer now through the mist. You pass beneath St. Aldwyn's gate just as the first true light reaches the fields outside town. Beyond the walls, the air smells cleaner immediately. Wet grass, river reeds, cold earth instead of smoke and refuse. The road curves along the riverbank where pilgrims already move slowly through the fog in little clusters. Some carry walking staffs decorated with ribbons or carved symbols. Others wear broad hats pinned with pilgrimage badges showing saints, shells, tiny crosses, or holy wells. A bent old woman walks barefoot through the mud despite the cold. Penance, perhaps? Or stubbornness? Medieval spirituality occasionally blurs the difference. The riverside shrine appears gradually through the mist ahead, a tiny stone chapel with a wooden bell tower leaning slightly sideways beside the road. Beeswax candles flicker inside the open doorway, while travellers crowd beneath awnings built against the damp morning drizzle. The dog hesitates outside, possibly out of reverence, possibly because someone dropped sausage nearby. Inside, the chapel smells of wax, wet wool, and rosemary smoke. A painted saint watches from behind the altar, his features darkened by centuries of candle soot. Beneath the image sits a narrow wooden box overflowing with tiny offerings, copper coins, scraps of cloth, carved tokens, even a child's wooden toy horse. People leave what they can. A young mother kneels beside the altar holding a feverish child wrapped tightly in blankets. Nearby, an old pilgrim touches the chapel wall repeatedly while whispering prayers beneath his breath. Some swear water from the nearby spring cured a blind mason last winter. Others insist the man simply recovered naturally after weeks indoors drinking broth and avoiding work. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Near the doorway, a monk distributes tiny cloth ribbons dipped in scented oil. "For protection on the roads," he murmurs. You accept one politely. The oil smells strongly of lavender and vinegar. The monk notices the dog lingering beside your boots. "Animals dislike cursed ground," he says quietly. The dog immediately steals a sausage from a distracted pilgrim outside. Perhaps the curse is selective. Beyond the chapel, pilgrims gather near a roadside spring flowing from beneath mossy stones into a shallow basin. Candles burn in little sheltered niches around the water despite the damp wind. A woman fills tiny clay bottles carefully. "For my sister's cough," she explains. Another traveller washes his hands and presses wet fingers against his forehead like a blessing. Even now, it is hard to tell whether faith here grows from hope, fear, or simple exhaustion after difficult roads and harder winters. You wander farther along the riverbank while mist slowly thins over the water. The flooding from yesterday left reeds flattened and bits of straw tangled among tree roots near the shore. Small fishing boats rock gently against muddy posts while fishermen repair nets beside smoky fires. One old fisherman waves you closer. "Town smells better from out here," he says. You look back toward the walls rising beyond the fog. He is absolutely correct. The fisherman continues mending torn netting with slow, practiced hands. "Still," he adds, "folk always return." "Why?" He shrugs. "Markets, work, family, ole." A surprisingly complete explanation of civilization. The dog circles twice beside the fire and collapses contentedly into the grass. Nearby, pilgrims share coarse bread and smoked eel beneath a patched canvas shelter while discussing roads northward. You catch fragments of conversation drifting through the cold air. Bandits near the forest crossings. A monastery offering free soup on feast days. A relic said to cure toothaches if kissed 3 times before sunrise. No one can quite agree whether the relic is truly holy or simply polished smooth by desperate people. The morning brightens gradually until the fog begins lifting fully from the river valley. Sunlight glows faintly across wet grass and chapel stones. Bells ring once more behind you from inside the town walls, calling workers back toward ordinary labour. Trade resumes. Mud returns. Smoke rises. The streets wait patiently for everyone to come back. You stand for a while beside the spring listening to water trickle over stone while pilgrims pass slowly along the road. Then eventually, with the dog trotting faithfully at your side again, you turn back toward the filthy beloved town beyond St. Aldwyn's Gate, where chimney smoke curls upward into the clearing medieval sky. By the time you return through St. Aldwyn's Gate, the town has fully awakened again. Morning sunlight spreads weakly across the rooftops, catching on puddles left by the flood and turning muddy streets briefly golden. Smoke rises from dozens of chimneys in slow twisting ribbons. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith hammers iron with rhythmic determination, while church bells drift over the noise like patient reminders that heaven still expects attendance despite the smell. The dog trots ahead confidently now, clearly convinced the town belongs partly to him. Vendors crowd the market square once more. Bread carts rattle over wet stones. Fishwives argue cheerfully beside barrels packed with river ice. Children weave through the crowds carrying baskets almost larger than themselves. And beneath everything, hidden but constant, flows the familiar scent of medieval city life: damp straw, soot, horse sweat, onions, wet wool, and gutters working beyond capacity. Yet after the quiet riverbank shrine, you notice something else too. People here move with practiced endurance. The filth no longer feels shocking to them, it feels ordinary. Streets flood, roofs leak, pigs escape, drains clog, and somehow the town continues breathing around it all. You wander uphill toward the monastery district, following the sound of bells echoing between buildings. The streets gradually widen here, and the mud grows slightly shallower beneath your boots. Wealthier stone houses appear among the timber structures, their upper windows glazed with expensive glass instead of parchment. Even the air changes. Cleaner somehow. Not entirely clean. Medieval towns simply do not possess that setting, but cleaner. Near the monastery wall, narrow drainage channels cut carefully through stone-guyed rainwater away from walkways. Small herb gardens grow beside the paths: rosemary, sage, fennel, mint. Their scent drifts gently through the morning air whenever the wind shifts. The dog sneezes approvingly. Ahead rises the monastery itself, built from pale stone darkened by age and weather. Its bell tower watches over the surrounding district while crows perch along the roofline like tiny suspicious monks. A lay brother opens the outer gate for a pair of travellers carrying walking staffs and muddy cloaks. You slip inside behind them into sudden quiet. The difference feels almost unreal. Beyond the walls, the town churns endlessly with shouting merchants, creaking carts, barking dogs, and rushing gutters. Here, sound softens immediately beneath cloister arches and gravel paths. Water trickles from a carved fountain into a stone basin. Sandals scrape softly across worn flagstones. Somewhere farther inside, monks chant morning prayers in low, steady voices. No one can quite agree whether monasteries truly feel holier than ordinary towns or merely smell better. Honestly, the smell alone makes a persuasive argument. A guest brother greets travellers near the entrance hall. His robe smells faintly of lavender smoke and beeswax polish. "Shelter?" he asks. "Only visiting." He nods calmly, as though people wandering in from filthy streets seeking temporary peace happens hourly. Which it probably does. The monastery guest house stands beside a small inner garden where herbs grow in neat raised beds protected from the mud outside. Lavender bushes line the walls. Bees drift lazily between flowers despite the cool air. After days in crowded streets, the orderliness feels almost suspicious. Inside the guest house hall, long wooden tables stand neatly arranged beneath whitewashed walls. Iron lamps hang overhead. Fresh rushes cover the floor, actually fresh this time rather than merely hopeful. A novice carries steaming bowls of broth toward waiting travellers. You accept one gratefully. The broth tastes simple but clean leeks. Barley, parsley, a little onion. Monastery cooking rarely aims for excitement. It aims for survival with modest dignity. The dog receives scraps from a smiling novice, and immediately decides monks are trustworthy. A fair judgment. Near the hearth, two elderly pilgrims warm their hands while discussing relics collected from distant shrines. One monastery keeps the finger bone of St. Bertram, one whispers. The other shakes his head. 3 churches claim that finger. Saint had many fingers, perhaps. Neither man seems especially troubled by the mathematics. Even now, it is hard to tell where faith ends and storytelling begins in the medieval world. Relics travel, legends grow, bones multiply in remarkably holy ways. You finish the broth slowly while studying the hall around you. Candles burn cleanly here, mostly beeswax. Their light glows steady against the stone walls without the greasy smoke common in taverns. Shelves hold carefully copied manuscripts beside little clay jars of herbs and medicines. A monk nearby crushes dried mint using a mortar stone while another copies text by the window, his ink-stained fingers moving patiently across parchment. The scratching sound of the quill feels strangely peaceful. Outside in the cloister garden, rainwater drips softly from stone arches into gravel paths. A small cemetery rests beyond the herb beds where simple wooden crosses lean gently beneath moss. Some swear monastery gardens grow better herbs because monks pray while tending them. Others quietly suspect manure and organisation deserve more credit. You step outside again into the cloister walk. The cool air smells of damp stone and rosemary. A fountain splashes quietly at the centre courtyard while pigeons flutter beneath the eaves overhead. The dog drinks carefully from the basin before lying in a patch of sunlight beside the wall. For a while, you simply wander. Past the kitchen where bread cools on wooden racks. Past the laundry yard where wool blankets hang neatly in rows. Past the infirmary windows where dried herbs sway from beams above clean linen bandages. Compared to the streets below, the monastery feels almost impossibly calm. Yet even here, traces of the outside world creep inward. Mud stains traveller boots near the guest hall. Floodwater dampens lower stones beside the outer wall. And from beyond the monastery gate comes the faint distant roar of the market square continuing its endless noisy life. A bell rings overhead once more. Monks emerge quietly from side passages heading toward prayer. Sandals whisper across stone. Sleeves brush against walls worn smooth by generations of passing hands. One old monk pauses beside you in the cloister. You came from the lower streets. Yes. He smiles faintly. Then this place must seem very peaceful. It does. The monk glances toward the town walls beyond the garden. Peace is easier behind stone walls, he says softly, though even here the roofs still leak. Somehow that comforts you, because perfect places rarely feel believable. The dog rises as you head back toward the gate, stretching lazily in the pale afternoon sun. Beyond the monastery walls, bells, smoke, mud, and crowded streets still wait for you. But for a little while at least, you carry the quiet scent of rosemary and clean stone back into Europe's dirtiest medieval town. Leaving the monastery feels a little like stepping out of a dream. The moment the gate closes behind you, the familiar sounds of the town rush back into place around your ears. Carts rattle over stones. Vendors shout prices through the market square. Somewhere nearby, a pig screams with astonishing emotional commitment, while 2 boys chase it through a puddle. The dog pauses beside you, blinking as though adjusting to reality again. You descend from the quieter monastery district toward the lower streets where smoke hangs heavier beneath the rooftops. Afternoon light stretches long and pale across the town now, catching on wet cobbles and standing water left behind by yesterday's flood. The market remains crowded, though the mood has softened into that slow, weary rhythm medieval towns adopt after midday meals. Merchants lean against stalls sipping weak ale. Apprentices carry baskets with less enthusiasm than before. A fiddler near the well plays half-heartedly while children dance around him badly. You continue downhill toward the riverside quarter once more. The smell warned you long before the street signs do. Tanner's Lane. In daylight after rain. The district looks even rougher than before. Floodwater left muddy streaks across the walls. Wet hides sway heavily from wooden racks overhead. Smoke crawls from low chimneys carrying thick, oily scents into the cold air. The dog stops again at the lane entrance. He refuses absolutely to continue. You scratch behind his bent ear. I understand. He settles beside an overturned barrel to wait while you continue alone into the district where leather keeps medieval Europe clothed. Saddled, shoed, belted, strapped, and smelling unforgettable. Workers crowd the lane despite the conditions. Tanneries cannot pause long without losing valuable hides. Men scrape soaked leather over beams, while apprentices stir vats using poles taller than themselves. One vat bubbles faintly beside the road. You decide firmly not to ask why. A broad woman carrying rolled leather sheets shoulders past you with enough force to move entire philosophies aside. Mind the gutter, she mutters. Excellent advice. You barely avoid stepping directly into a trench filled with runoff from the workshops. The liquid slides sluggishly downhill toward the river carrying scraps of fur, bark, and cloudy foam. No one can quite agree how tanners survive breathing this air daily. Some claim workers eventually lose their sense of smell entirely. Others believe they simply become stronger than ordinary people through stubborn exposure. A few steps farther down, you notice small wooden charms nailed above several doorways. Tiny carved hands, crosses, animal teeth tied with red string. Protective symbols against illness, bad fortune, or jealous rivals, perhaps. One workshop doorway even displays a shriveled eel nailed above the frame. You choose not to investigate the theology behind that. The riverbank itself buzzes with labour. Flat-bottom barges unload bark bundles used for tanning mixtures, while labourers stack them beneath dripping awnings. Nearby, women rinse dyed cloth in shallow water despite repeated shouted warnings from fishermen farther downstream. Arguments about river use appear older than the town itself. A fisherman hauling nets from his boat shakes his head toward the tanneries. Water tastes like old boots after heavy rain. Another man beside him shrugs. Could be worse. How? The second fisherman thinks carefully. Could taste like new boots. Remarkably, this does not settle the debate. You wander farther along the river where smoke from boiling vats drifts low across the shore. Here the buildings lean crookedly over narrow alleys crowded with stacked barrels, broken carts, and heaps of bark scraps turning slowly soft in the damp. Children still play here somehow. A little girl hops across puddles carrying a wooden doll wrapped in cloth while her brother pushes a hoop through the mud using a stick. They move around the filth with effortless familiarity. For them this is not some horrifying medieval survival challenge. It is simply home. That thought lingers with you as you pass an open workshop where finished leather goods hang drying beside the hearth. Boots, harness straps, gloves, belts polished smooth with oil. Inside, an old craftsman stitches leather carefully by window light while a younger apprentice works the bellows beside the fire. The old man glances up, looking to buy. Just looking. Best way, he says, buying costs coin. A fair commercial strategy. He gestures toward the shelves. Good leather lasts years if cared for proper. Oil it before winter. Keep rats away. The apprentice snorts softly. Keep thieves away first. The old craftsman nods. Also true. You study the room more closely. Bundles of herbs hang above the hearth, likely to fight the smell as much as sickness. Iron tools line the walls beside scraps of parchment patterns. A tiny saint figure sits tucked near the window, blackened by smoke until only its outline remains visible. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether craftsmen pray more for safety, profit, or dry weather. Probably all three. Outside again. Evening begins creeping slowly over the river district. The sunlight fades from gold to grey while lanterns appear one by one along the lane. Workers continue despite the dimming light. Scraping, hammering, stirring vats. Labour here never feels dramatic, just endless. A cart loaded with cured hides rattles past you uphill toward the market square. The mule pulling it looks emotionally exhausted. Honestly, so do you. You turn back toward the upper streets where cleaner air waits in relative terms. The dog greets your return with visible relief and immediately sniffs your cloak suspiciously. Yes, you admit, it's worse down there. He sneezes directly at the tannery district. Reasonable again. Together you climb slowly uphill through winding streets now glowing with torchlight. Evening smoke thickens between the houses. Supper smells drift from open shutters, onions frying in fat, coarse bread baking near hearths, bits of fish roasting over coals. Women sweep fresh rushes across tavern floors while apprentices light lanterns outside workshops. A bell rings from the monastery tower beyond the rooftops, soft and low in the evening mist. Near the market square, a storyteller gathers children beside a brazier and begins describing river spirits who supposedly punish liars by tangling their fishing nets forever. One child asks whether the spirits also punish tax collectors. The storyteller pauses. Only if the spirits are very brave. The children nod solemnly. You continue toward the alehouse through muddy lanes glowing amber beneath swinging lanterns. Behind you, the tannery smoke still rises into the darkening sky above Europe's dirtiest medieval streets. And ahead, somewhere beyond the warm tavern windows, supper and firelight wait patiently for your return. The alehouse glows like a lantern against the darkening street. Rain has not returned yet, though the air still feels damp enough to drink. Lantern light trembles across puddles outside the doorway while smoke drifts low between the crowded rooftops. Somewhere farther down the lane, a watchman calls the evening hour in a voice tired enough to sound centuries old already. The dog slips inside ahead of you confidently now, no longer pretending to be a stray visitor. An apprentice near the hearth greets him by name. Apparently his name is Turnip. This somehow feels correct. Inside, the common room swells with evening noise again. Travellers crowd the benches shoulder to shoulder, while servants weave carefully between tables carrying trenchers, piled with roasted roots and black bread. The hearth roars bright beneath soot-dark rafters where onions and herbs hang drying above the heat. You settle near the fire while Turnip curls against your boots like a creature who has signed permanent residency papers. At the far table near the wall, several townsfolk argue loudly enough for half the room to listen whether they wish to or not. Manor court disputes. A narrow-faced woman waves one hand dramatically. I'm telling you, his pigs blocked the drainage ditch again. A grey-bearded man points back accusingly. Your nephew dumped cabbage waste in it first. A third voice joins in. The whole lane smelled cursed for 2 days. The alewife sighs deeply behind the counter. Apparently this discussion has achieved historical status. Medieval towns depend heavily on local manor courts to settle everyday arguments exactly like this: blocked drains, wandering livestock, broken fences, stolen firewood, market cheating, and occasionally accusations involving suspicious geese. No one can quite agree whether medieval justice is fairer than modern justice. It certainly involves more mud. The cooper from previous evening sits beside the hearth again. warming thick hands around a clay cup. You hear about Miller's Alley, he asks as you sit. Only flooding. Drain collapsed this morning. That sounds expensive. Everything's expensive when it sinks. An excellent summary of medieval infrastructure. Across the room, a clerk from the town hall carefully unrolls damp parchments while muttering under his breath. Ink stains darken his sleeves nearly to the elbow. Beside him rests a wooden box filled with wax seals and little leather-bound records. Town bureaucracy survives even in streets where pigs occasionally outrank sanitation. The clerk overhears the argument nearby and shakes his head. 3 complaints already filed today, he mutters. 1 about gutters, 2 about chickens. Related us, the cooper? Possibly. The fiddler near the hearth begins another slow tune while conversation folds comfortably around it. Supper smells thicken, the air smoked eel, onions, barley stew, garlic simmering in fat. You realise medieval towns survive partly because nearly everything smells stronger than the streets if cooked properly. At the neighbouring bench, a merchant complains about market tolls while counting thin silver coins beneath candlelight. Paid twice this week crossing the bridge. A wool trader beside him shrugs, cheaper than replacing drowned oxen. Barely. The dog lifts his head briefly when a serving girl passes carrying roasted scraps toward the kitchen. Turnip's loyalty appears highly conditional. Near the staircase, 2 women discuss folk remedies for damp weather fevers. Boiled thyme helps. No, thyme's for coughing. Fever needs willow bark. My aunt swore by vinegar socks. The other woman pauses. Did they work? No, but her feet smelled very clean. Honestly, in this century that may count as medical progress. Even now, it is hard to tell how much medieval healing depends upon actual remedies and how much depends upon simply caring for someone while time does the harder work. The hearth settles lower as evening deepens outside. Firelight flickers across damp cloaks hanging from wall pegs. Someone tosses fresh rushes over muddy footprints near the doorway, while another traveller wipes rainwater from boots using old straw. Above the noise, monastery bells ring softly once again beyond the rooftops. Always the bells. Marking prayers. Meals. Sleep. The passing of hours through smoke and mud. You glance toward the clerk again as he dries parchments near the fire. What happens if people ignore the court, you ask? The clerk snorts softly. They pay fines. And if they refuse, they pay larger fines. And if they still refuse, he looks thoughtfully into the flames. Eventually someone confiscates a pig. A terrifying legal system. Across the room, the drainage argument somehow continues gaining detail. Now it apparently involves spoiled turnips, a missing bucket, and accusations of intentional ditch sabotage. Those who tell the tale never fully agree who originally blocked the lane. After enough ale, every version becomes dramatically heroic. The cooper leans closer. Wait until winter freezes the gutters, he says. Then folk start throwing refuse onto the ice instead. That sounds worse. It is worse. He drinks calmly, but easier to walk through. Practicality again triumphs over dignity. The alewife eventually bangs a ladle against the counter hard enough to silence the room briefly. Either settle it tomorrow at court, she warns the arguing table, or take it outside where the pigs can judge properly. The room laughs. Even the grey-bearded man looks slightly ashamed. The fiddler changes melodies again while supper slowly gives way to quieter evening drinking. Travellers loosen cloaks beside the warmth. Apprentices yawn openly. Candles burn lower beneath smoky rafters. You notice tiny carved symbols scratched into several table edges near your elbow. Crosses. Initials. Simple circles for luck. One crude drawing of what may be either a saint or an extremely disappointed goose. People leave little marks everywhere they stay long enough, proof they existed briefly inside these crowded rooms before continuing down muddy roads towards somewhere else. Turnip snores softly against your boots. Outside, wind brushes lightly against the shutters while distant watchmen continue calling the hours through the darkened streets. Somewhere nearby, a cartwheel rattles over stones, followed by curses and laughter. Life narrowing gently towards sleep again. The clerk finally gathers his parchments and stands carefully. "Caught at dawn," he mutters unhappily. The cooper raises his cup. May the pigs testify honestly. The clerk leaves without answering. One by one, the common room empties into the deepening medieval night until only scattered travellers remain beside the dying fire. You sit a little longer listening to the bells fading across the rooftops while smoke curls upward into the rafters above Europe's muddy endless streets. Cold arrives quietly during the night. Not true winter yet, but the first sharp warning of it, by dawn. Frost clings silver along roof edges and puddles where thin skins of ice across the quieter corners of the streets. Smoke rises thicker from chimneys into the pale grey morning, while townsfolk walk faster beneath wool cloaks, shoulders hunched against the cold. You wake to monastery bells once again rolling through the dark before sunrise. Turnip remains firmly asleep. The loft above the alehouse feels colder than previous nights. Wind slips through the roof boards carrying the smell of frost, wet stone, and distant chimney smoke. Somewhere below, someone already chops wood beside the kitchen hearth. You pull your cloak around your shoulders and descend carefully into the common room where travellers cluster close to the fire with expressions suggesting humanity invented warmth too late. The alewife hands you hot oat pottage thickened with barley. "Cold season's coming early," she mutters. Outside, the market square already stirs beneath pale winter light. Frost sparkles briefly across wagon roofs before dissolving into mud under boots and wheels. The air smells sharper now, less rot, more smoke and cold river water. Winter changes medieval towns completely. People begin storing everything. Drying fish, smoking meat, stacking firewood, guarding grain. Every household turns quietly towards survival. You wander through the market while Turnip trots beside you, leaving damp paw prints over frozen patches. Merchants wrap cloaks tighter around themselves while opening stalls with stiff hands. Near the church wall, a line forms beside a smoked fish cellar whose barrels release salty cold air into the morning. Herring, eel, cod preserved hard enough to survive half a year. A woman beside you squeezes loaves thoughtfully before buying. "Winter bread's heavier," she remarks. The baker shrugs, keeps longer. Everything now becomes about lasting. At the edge of the square, labourers unload sacks of grain into a stone storehouse, reinforced with thick oak doors and iron locks. 2 guards stand nearby with spears resting against their shoulders. A rat darts between the sacks. One guard throws a boot at it automatically. Misses entirely. The rat appears unsurprised. No one can quite agree whether medieval towns belong more to people or rats during winter. The rats certainly behave with confidence. You follow the movement of workers uphill toward the larger communal storehouses near the guild district. Here, buildings grow sturdier, built partly from stone to resist damp and fire. Narrow ventilation slits line the upper walls while carts queue outside carrying barrels, dried peas, onions, and bundles of wool. The smell drifting from the storehouses feels oddly comforting. Grain dust, cold timber, smoked meat, beeswax, winter smells. Inside one open doorway, clerks mark tallies onto wax tablets while workers stack sacks nearly to the ceiling. A merchant argues loudly over missing turnips. 3 barrels short. A clerk barely looks up. Then perhaps your barrels learn to walk. An old joke, apparently. 2 labourers nearby laugh anyway. You continue past rows of hanging smoked fish darkened by salt and fire. Women inspect bundles of dried herbs tied carefully with twine thyme, sage, mint, wormwood. Some herb-seasoned food. Others treat sickness. A few simply help rooms smell less alarming during long winters indoors. Even now it is hard to tell which use matters most. Near another storehouse, children gather chestnuts fallen from a cart while pretending not to notice the owner shouting at them. One boy stuffs nuts into both sleeves before fleeing triumphantly through the crowd. Turnip briefly considers joining the crime. You steer him elsewhere. Beyond the grain halls, the butcher's quarter bustles with colder purpose now that winter approaches. Hooks hang beneath awnings, while workers salt cuts of pork into barrels lined with coarse grey crystals. A butcher sharpens knives beside the doorway. Cold weather keeps meat honest, he says. You're not entirely sure meat should require moral supervision. Beside him hangs a cluster of garlic braids and dried rowan branches tied with red thread. For luck, you ask. For thieves, he replies. Apparently medieval burglars fear decorative vegetables. A bell rings overhead from the monastery tower. The square pauses almost unconsciously. Not stopping fully, just softening for a breath while sound drifts across rooftops and market stalls. Bells anchor the day even more firmly in winter, when sunlight fades early and cold makes time feel heavier. You and Turnip wander farther toward the riverside warehouses where barges unload timber along the frost-slick banks. Workers stamp their feet constantly for warmth, while hauling ropes stiffened by cold water. Smoke from nearby cook fires drifts low across the river. Someone boils cabbage nearby. The smell reaches astonishing distances. A pair of fishermen mend nets beside a brazier while discussing weather signs. Geese flew south early. River froze sooner last year. My cousin says wolves came near the North Road already. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how harsh winter will become until it arrives and settles the matter personally. Near the warehouses, you notice tiny clay bowls set along windowsills filled with salt and herbs. Protection charms again. Some believe they keep sickness from entering homes during winter months when families crowd tightly indoors beside smoky fires. Others claim they discourage wandering spirits drawn by darkness and cold. Or rats. Medieval life involves constant uncertainty about exactly what one is protecting against. By midday, pale sunlight struggles weakly through cloud cover before fading again behind drifting grey. The market grows quieter as townsfolk hurry indoors carrying purchases beneath their cloaks. You return slowly toward the alehouse through streets now crunching faintly with frost beneath the mud. Smoke thickens between the buildings. Windows glow warmer. The whole town seems to draw inward against the cold. Outside one doorway, an old woman scatters fresh rushes mixed with mint across her threshold. The sharp scent rises briefly above the heavier smells of the lane. Turnip sneezes directly into the herbs. She laughs softly. Dog's wiser than half the town. Probably true. Ahead, the Red Lion sign above the alehouse creaks gently in the winter wind while firelight glows invitingly behind the shutters. Inside, warmth waits again beside the hearth as Europe's dirtiest medieval streets slowly prepare themselves for the long cold season ahead. By late afternoon, the cold sharpens into a clear, bright evening. The sky over the town turns pale blue at the edges, then slowly deepens toward violet above the crooked rooftops. Frost gathers again wherever sunlight fails to reach, silvering barrels, roof beams, cartwheels, and the stiff straw piled near doorways. Smoke rises straight upward now, less wind to scatter it, so the whole town seems tucked beneath a darkening veil of chimney breath. Inside the alehouse, warmth gathers early. The Red Lion sign creaks softly outside while the common room fills faster than usual, not only with travellers but with neighbours carrying dishes, baskets, jugs, and folded cloths. A small feast is forming, the sort that appears when cold weather settles in and everyone suddenly remembers that winter is easier when endured loudly together. The alewife directs traffic with a ladle like a battlefield commander. Fish there, bread near the wall, keep that dog away from the pies. Turnip looks personally wounded. You find a place along the bench while people crowd in from the street, shaking frost from cloaks and stamping mud from boots onto fresh rushes. The floor will lose this battle within minutes, but for now the herbs mixed among the rushes release a clean scent of mint and rosemary beneath the heavier smells of smoke, ale, and wool. Platters arrive slowly. Smoked eel, roasted turnips, onion pies, thick trenchers cut from stale bread, a pot of cabbage and barley stew heavy enough to repair sadness. Someone brings a small dish of honeyed nuts, and the room briefly treats it with the reverence normally reserved for relics. No one can quite agree whether this gathering honours a saint's eve, the end of flood trouble, the first frost, or merely the alewife's desire to empty certain barrels before they turn questionable. Medieval calendars contain many feasts, fasts, vigils, fairs, and excuses to eat beside firelight. This one may be all of them at once. The cooper sits nearby, already holding a wooden cup. Street feast, he says. It's indoors. Street came in on everyone's boots. A fair correction. Near the hearth, the fiddler begins a gentle tune while a boy taps rhythm on an overturned bucket. The music is soft at first, then warmer as voices join in. Not polished singing, not courtly, just rough town voices rising beneath rafters dark with soot. You eat from a trencher while listening. The bread soaks up gravy from the stew, growing soft at the edges. Medieval table manners allow everyone to share dishes with a frankness that future centuries might find alarming. Fingers reach, knives cut, cups pass hand to hand. The ale tastes sour and smoky as ever, but by now you almost expect it, like bad weather or suspicious drains. Across from you, two women debate whether fennel seeds tucked under a pillow can prevent nightmares. My grandmother swore by it, one says. My grandmother slept through a roof collapse, says the other. She was not reliable evidence. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such charms are believed firmly, half believed fondly, or repeated because grandmothers remain powerful long after death. At the far end of the room, pilgrims display badges from distant shrines. One shaped like a scallop shell catches the candlelight, another shows a tiny saint holding a book, a third looks like a foot, though nobody can explain why. The clerk from the manor court appears late, looking frozen and annoyed. Pigs find, he announces. The room applauds. Apparently the drainage dispute has found justice. The grey-bearded man from the argument raises his cup solemnly. To honest ditches, everyone replies, because people will toast nearly anything if ale is present. Turnip finally succeeds in securing a scrap of roast onion from beneath the table. He chews with the solemnity of a monk illuminating scripture. The feast grows softer as evening deepens. Children doze against their mothers' sides. Travellers lean closer to the hearth. The fiddler's tune slows, becoming almost lullaby-like beneath the chatter. Someone tells a story about a relic carried through muddy streets during a summer fever many years ago. Some swear the fever broke the next morning. Others claim the weather changed, the wells were cleaned, and the town finally stopped dumping waste near the churchyard. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which part mattered most. Perhaps all of it did. Perhaps people simply needed hope badly enough to carry it in procession. You glance toward the shuttered windows. Outside, the street lies dark and cold, but within the alehouse the whole town seems briefly gathered into one warm pocket of light. Mud waits beyond the threshold. Gutters wait. Frost waits. Work waits at dawn. For now there is stew. For now there is music. For now there are candles burning low and neighbours laughing over old complaints that have become safer through repetition. The alewife passes with more bread and pauses beside you. "You've lasted longer than most travellers," she says. That sounds encouraging. It wasn't meant to be. Still, she gives you an extra piece of honey cake. High praise are perhaps later, when the bowl's empty and the cups grow light. People begin clearing tables. Trenchers too soaked to eat are gathered into a basket for animals or poorer folk waiting near the kitchen door. Nothing useful disappears easily here. Even leftovers have destinations. Fresh ashes swept near the hearth. Rushes are pushed aside where spilled ale darkened them. Candles are pinched out one by one except those nearest the fire. The room settles. The feast thins into murmured conversation, then into yawns, then into the creak of benches as people rise and wrap themselves for the cold street outside. You step briefly to the doorway and look out. The town glimmers under frost and torchlight. The gutter has slowed. Roofs shine faintly. Far above, monastery bells begin their deep evening call across the sleeping streets. Turnip stands beside you, warm from the hearth, nose lifted toward the cold. Behind you, someone begins humming the feast tune again, very quietly. Ahead, the street waits dark and silver. And for the first time, Europe's dirtiest medieval town feels almost tender beneath the winter stars. The feast leaves the alehouse glowing long after most voices fade. Even near midnight, warmth still clings to the beams and walls as though the room itself has absorbed the evening's laughter. Embers pulse softly beneath the hearth ash. Half-burned candles lean crookedly in their holders. Somewhere upstairs, exhausted travellers already snore beneath wool blankets while wind brushes lightly against the roof. You remain awake a little longer. Turnip sleeps beside the dying fire, paws twitching now and then as if still chasing roast onions through his dreams. The alewife wipes tables slowly beneath the candlelight while the last few customers finish their cups in comfortable silence. Outside, the town has grown quieter than you have yet heard it. Winter quiet, different from ordinary night silence. The cold presses sound downward, softening the streets beneath frost and smoke. Eventually you pull your cloak tighter and step outside. The air bites immediately at your face. Lantern light trembles across the lane while thin ice glitters along the gutter edges. The muddy streets that churned endlessly beneath rain only days ago now stiffen slowly under frost. Roofs shine pale silver beneath the moonlight. Chimney smoke drifts upward in straight, quiet lines. You begin walking without hurry through the sleeping town. Turnip follows after a moment, yawning dramatically before trotting at your heels. Torch brackets flicker along the walls as you pass shuttered homes and silent workshops. Behind closed doors, families sleep packed close beneath blankets while embers fade inside hearths. Somewhere a baby cries briefly, then quiets again. The streets feel narrower at night. The upper floors lean overhead so tightly in places they nearly block the stars. Water drips slowly from frozen beams. A cart stands abandoned beside the lane. One wheel still sunk half into hardened mud from yesterday's flood. Nothing here feels clean, but everything feels lived in. Near the market square, frost has settled across empty stalls and folded awnings. The daytime chaos has vanished completely. No shouting merchants, no arguing fishwives, only the creak of signs swaying gently overhead and the distant echo of watchmen somewhere beyond the church. You pause beside the public well. A thin layer of ice rims the bucket rope where water splashed earlier and froze. Beside the stone basin sits a tiny offering someone left during the evening feast, half a honey cake wrapped in cloth. For luck, perhaps, or kindness, or because medieval people understand hungry mornings very well. A watchman emerges slowly from the fog carrying a lantern pole. "Cold night," he mutters as he passes. You nod. He studies Turnip briefly. That dog's still alive then. Apparently. Good creature. The watchman pauses. Smarter than most people in this district. Turnip accepts the compliment calmly. The watchman continues down the lane, striking his staff against stones as he calls the hour into the darkness. His voice fades gradually beneath the rooftops. No one can quite agree whether medieval watchmen truly protect towns, or simply wander through them announcing weather conditions loudly. Still, hearing another human voice out here feels strangely comforting. You cross the empty square toward the churchyard where frost whitens the grass between crooked gravestones. Candles still flicker faintly inside the chapel windows beyond iron railings dark with age. Somebody is praying inside even now. Somebody always is. The bells begin again overhead, low and distant from the monastery tower. Their sound rolls gently across the rooftops while smoke drifts through moonlight above the sleeping town. Always the bells, marking hours no matter who listens. You continue wandering downhill toward the river quarter where mist gathers thickest near the water. Here the smell returns stronger beneath the cold tannery smoke. Wet timber, stale flood water trapped beneath frozen mud. Yet even Tanner's Lane sleeps peacefully now. Work tables stand silent beneath frost. Leather racks creak softly in the wind. A single lantern burns outside one workshop where someone still tends boiling vats through the night. The river crawls black beyond the buildings, half frozen near the edges. A fisherman sits alone beside a tiny brazier repairing nets by lantern light. You'll freeze out here, you tell him. Fish don't wait for spring, he replies. Reasonable again. The old fisherman gestures toward the town above the riverbank. Looks prettier at night. You glance back. He is right. Torchlight glows warmly behind shutters. Smoke softens the rooftops. Frost turns muddy streets silver. Distance hides the gutters and refuse heaps and flood stains beneath something almost beautiful. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether medieval towns were miserable places or comforting ones. Standing here beside the dark river, you suspect they were both at once. You eventually climb back uphill through the silent lanes while frost crunches beneath your boots. Turnip trots faithfully beside you, stopping occasionally to inspect mysterious nighttime smells with grave concentration. At the market square, snow begins falling. Not heavy snow, just a few slow drifting flakes catching lantern light as they tumble through the cold air. The whole town seems to pause beneath them. Roofs, signs, church towers, the red lion above the alehouse door. Everything softens slightly beneath the first hint of winter. You stop there for a moment watching snow settle into the muddy ruts of the street. Somewhere beyond the walls, wind moves through frozen fields. Somewhere inside the monastery, monks continue their night prayers beneath beeswax candles and painted saints. And here in the town below, gutters freeze slowly beneath falling snow while ordinary people sleep behind oak doors and smoke-dark rafters after another long day inside Europe's dirtiest medieval streets. Turnip nudges your hand impatiently. Warmth waits upstairs. The fire still glows faintly. And tomorrow, the bells will ring again. Morning arrives wrapped in snow. Only a thin snowfall, barely enough to cover the rooftops and market stalls. Yet the entire town seems changed beneath it. The mud still exists underneath. Of course, medieval streets do not surrender so easily. But for a little while the snow softens everything it touches. You wake to pale light filtering through the loft boards and the muted quiet that comes only after fresh snow. Even the snoring travellers sound gentler somehow. Turnip sleeps curled tightly beside the pallet, warm and deeply unconcerned with weather, politics, sanitation, or any other medieval difficulty. Below, the alehouse hearth crackles steadily. You descend the stairs slowly while cold morning light glows through the shutters. The common room feels calmer than usual. Travellers sit close beside the fire, warming stiff fingers around steaming cups, while snow drifts softly beyond the windows. The alewife sets bread and oat porridge before you without speaking much. Even she seems quieter today. Outside, the town moves carefully beneath the snow. Footprints crisscross the square. Smoke rises pale blue into the cold sky. Church bells drift softly across the rooftops while people sweep fresh snow from thresholds using bundled straw brooms. The gutters still run beneath the white surface, hidden now but not gone. You step into the square with Turnip beside you. The market stalls stand half open already despite the cold. Bakers arrange dark loaves beside frosted windows. Fishmongers chip ice from barrel lids. A boy slides accidentally through the snow into a pile of rushes while nearby adults pretend not to laugh. Some things survive every season. You wander slowly through the streets you now know almost by memory. Past the cooper's workshop smelling of oak shavings and damp smoke. Past the churchyard where snow settles gently over crooked stones. Past the narrow lane where women scatter ashes to keep the paths from freezing. Everywhere, little details repeat themselves quietly. A candle burning behind parchment windows. Laundry stiffening in the cold. A monk hurrying beneath a fur-lined cloak. The distant scrape of shovels against frozen mud. No one can quite agree whether winter improves medieval towns or merely hides them temporarily beneath prettier colours. Today, at least, the town feels softer. You reach the market well where thin ice rims the stones. Someone has left evergreen branches tied beside the bucket rope for luck during the cold months. Nearby, 2 children attempt unsuccessfully to build a snow saint against the church wall. It looks more like a potato wearing a halo. Turnip appears impressed anyway. The bells ring again from the monastery beyond the rooftops. Always the bells. You begin climbing slowly toward the higher streets near the monastery gate where the snow lies cleaner and less disturbed. Your boots crunch softly over frozen ground, while chimney smoke drifts across the pale sky. The monastery walls glow faintly gold beneath winter sunlight. Inside the gate, the herb gardens sleep beneath frost while narrow paths have already been swept clear by quiet novices carrying wooden shovels. You walk through the cloister once more. Everything here feels slower now. Softer. Water in the fountain moves beneath a skin of ice. Candles flicker behind chapel windows. Somewhere distant, monks chant prayers in low, steady voices that blend almost perfectly with the wind. You sit for a while beneath the stone arches while Turnip curls against your boots. The town below continues breathing beneath its blanket of snow. Carts creak faintly. Smoke rises. Doors open and close. Life continuing exactly as it always has. And slowly, almost without noticing, the streets no longer seem only filthy. You remember the floodwater rushing through Tanner's Lane, the market arguments, the smell of smoke and wet wool, the dripping gutters, the crowded alehouse glowing warm against the rain, the pilgrims carrying badges through the mist, the old fisherman beside the frozen river, all of it tangled together now into something strangely human. Because these streets are not remembered for being perfect. They are remembered because people endured them together, They baked bread beside leaking roofs, shared firelight during storms, carried herbs against sickness, laughed over blocked drains and wandering pigs, prayed beside smoky candles, and somehow built lives inside the mud. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the town survives because of its people, or whether the people survive because they belong to the town. Perhaps both. By evening, snow begins melting slowly from the roofs. Drops fall from eaves into the streets below. Lanterns glow one by one through the growing dusk. You return at last to the alehouse where warmth spills once more across the frozen lane. Inside, the fire burns low and golden. Travellers speak quietly beneath smoke-dark rafters, while candles flicker against wooden walls polished by generations of hands and sleeves. The alewife gives Turnip a scrap of roasted fish without pretending otherwise. High honour indeed. You settle beside the hearth while outside the bells ring softly through the snowy dark. The sound drifts across rooftops and frozen gutters and quiet market stalls before fading into the winter night. The room grows warmer. The voices softer. The fire steadier. And gradually the medieval town outside begins to feel far away, as though the snow itself is covering the streets in silence, one careful layer at a time. You picture the narrow lanes settling into darkness beneath the drifting smoke. The monastery candles glowing behind stone windows. The river moving slowly under thin ice. The watchmen walking their final rounds through sleeping streets. The market square empty beneath frost. And above it all, the bells continuing patiently through the cold. Now the town grows dimmer. The muddy roads fade into shadow. The gutters quiet. The lanterns blur softly in the distance. You feel the warmth of the hearth against tired hands while wind brushes gently against the shutters outside. Nothing more is required of you tonight. No roads left to walk. No tolls to pay. No flooded lanes to cross. Only the slow comfort of firelight, wool blankets, drifting snow, and the quiet breathing of an old medieval town finally settling to sleep. And as the bells ring once more across the rooftops of Europe's dirtiest streets, the sound grows softer and softer until it becomes part of the darkness itself.